were in the chat. Please do continue to share your experiences, share your information. I'm very aware of the fact that we've got people on the call tonight who, got their own first-hand experiences of trying to protect heritage during war. And so please do come in with your experiences and add your information. This is something we can learn so much from each other. And so please do contribute. That would be great if you did that. So this is a series of 3 classes, which is going to be before, during, and after war. And we're on the middle one now of during war. So what exactly, how you might respond if, you're unlucky enough to find yourself in this situation. So, well, I wanted to sort of begin by picking up on what Emma Cunliffe spoke of last week, because Emma was has been very involved in drawing up no strike lists. So if you are unfortunate enough to find yourself in this situation of conflict coming your way very imminently, I wanted to kind of do a segue from last week and say, well, one question you can ask yourself is your site important enough to be put on a no strike list? Is this actually a possibility for you? Would it be appropriate? Would it be the right thing to do? I mean, it might make your site more of a target. Last week, we looked at instances where, in fact, it wasn't necessarily the best approach, because if you have a situation of non-state actors who might actually think that made it more of a target rather than less of a target, that might not be the right way to go. But it's something certainly that, you can think of. And Emma was very kind. She shared with me a lot of information that she has been involved in herself. One of the cases where a no strike list did work very well was Libya. And it was brought together. The no strike list in 2011 was brought together very quickly. And it actually seems to have been successful. Emma was very involved in this. She actually provided this slide for me, which I've used in my classes. It was a very small group of people in a very short length of time, managed to get a no strike list together for Libya. But of course, you can only put a minority of sites on that. There's only a sort of limit to how many can go on such a list. So the question is, when war seems imminent, what are the threats that you need to prepare for? And I've divided them into 3. Loss through stealing and looting, loss through damage, destruction, and then a kind of a slightly different one, which is how to deal with social media propaganda and how to respond. This has been something that really is very much a feature of 21st century warfare, and it's really necessitated a different approach, shall we say. So looking at loss through stealing or looting, and I guess there's not really much of a difference in the end between stealing and looting. It's really very much the same. Stealing and looting from museums, it can be opportunistic. It can be part of the breakdown in law and order. So it might just be the general populace. It might not be very organized, or it might be a systematic requisitioning by aggressors. Looting from archaeological sites usually tends to be local people. It's often subsistence looting. Of course, it's not going to be successful unless they've got somebody to sell it on to. But it has to be said that dealers are very good at getting themselves into war situations and supply and buying material from local subsistence looters. I mean, usually local people, we call it subsistence looting because they don't get that much money from it. It's people further up the supply chain who really make the money. Really, it's people caught often, you know, I mean, it sounds a mundane thing to say, but often a war or a conflict, you know, you will lose your job, you will lose your income. It doesn't sound like it's one of the worst crises, but of course it is if you don't have any money to support your family. So it is a common accompaniment. And of course, many of the places that have been the site of recent conflicts are places that are really rich in archaeology. And so the opportunities exist there. Evacuation may seem an obvious response. So you're thinking, well, the best thing is to move everything out. But of course, it's very expensive and also logistically demanding on resources. You know, be fairly impossible to move everything. So you've really got to kind of make decisions. I'm including here a LinkedIn post that I saw from Aleph, which put a lot of work into Ukraine, supporting the evacuation of many museums, libraries, and archives. And it's a big job, you know. It's not only a big job, it's also in many ways a risky job. It's usually seen as the last resort. I like this photograph. I took it because it was, I decided to use this one because it's the evacuation of the Louvre on the 3rd of September, 1939. Well, war was declared on the 1st of September, 1939. So clearly they really left it to the last minute to do it in the hope that they wouldn't have to do it. And it's quite risky because there is a lot of theft that goes on in an evacuation, in packing everything up. Items also get lost and they also get damaged, of course. And if you're moving the items out of the country, there is a fear that once removed, they won't return. And that is, you know, that is something that is a genuine fear in some countries. And I'm going to come on to talk about that in a moment. Of course, often you don't really want to tell everybody your plans. It is better to keep the plans confidential. And that is, so, I mean, often we don't really know what plans have been made. A lot of suppositions are made that there hasn't been any preparation, but that's not necessarily true. And it's quite right that such plans are kept quiet. In some of this presentation, there's going to be a little bit of an overlap with what we did in January. In the January course, we looked at disaster risk management. And in fact, if you know, it can be difficult to get organizations to prepare for conflict. Because of course it's, you know, it's almost an admission that you think it's going to happen. But if you can put this together with general risk management, such as, for example, one might find in dealing with extreme weather events, or if you live in an earthquake zone, dealing with earthquakes, because there are many, many similarities. Many of the responses will be the same. And so if it can go together in one plan, in a disaster risk management plan, then, you know, there's more likelihood that the resources will be given to it and that something influential, something that's effective, will actually be organized. I think I did put this in the January presentation, but it's a story I really love. And how people become very inventive when in a crisis. And this is a story that the National Archaeological Museum in Athens is very proud of. When I went there a little while ago, they had an exhibition on this, and I thought it was really great. During World War II, Athens had its own plan because, of course, it knew that it would be a target for this because of the German love of Greek art. And those of you who've been to Athens Museum, you'll know that it's got this fabulous room, which is full of kouroi, or Greek male statues. And but they are massive, they are absolutely huge. And there was no way really you were ever going to be able to get those out, all of them out, and evacuated. And so they came across the plan to instead hide the statues under the floor because they were too big to move from the building. So they dug up the floor and they put them underneath and covered up the floor so that when the Germans arrived, they found empty rooms. And in fact, I have seen that. I have heard stories of that also in Italy, of big wall paintings being hidden behind false walls that were built in front, etc. People can get very inventive, and you know, it's kind of needed, because when you get in this situation, there's always going to be an element of improvisation, of flexibility, of having to be adaptable. So there are many instances in which this has happened and has actually been very, very effective. Now, coming back to this idea of should you, you know, evacuate? Well, evacuating to a kind of safer nearby place within your own country is one thing, but it has more than once been suggested that objects should be sent abroad to safe havens, as they're called, to move objects out of conflict zones and take them into other countries. Well, this is a very controversial subject. This is something that has gone in and out of favor, I suppose we could say. In 1999, there was an incident that became quite sort of something that really rather sort of, I think, changed people's approach to this, when a man called Paul Bouchera, who was the Swiss director of an Afghan foundation, had negotiated an agreement to ship out endangered art for safekeeping to a Swiss museum. And the objects were crated up to be shipped. But then, somewhat at the last minute, UNESCO refused to authorize the shipments and found them to be in contravention of the 1970 convention. And they denounced Paul Bouchera. And as a result, the items didn't go. And then they subsequently ended up getting destroyed in the looting of the museum. So it was a case that really was unfortunate, and it kind of changed people's attitude towards the idea of a safe haven. And once again, curators went back to the idea of like hiding them within their own country. Of course, the reason why the idea of a safe haven is controversial is because it really dates back to the sort of whole colonial aspect of imperial powers going into a colony and taking all the objects and taking them back to their museums. And of course, we are still going through the aftermath of this, as big museums today, you know, are struggling to come to terms with their colonial past. And the decolonization process is very long and quite painful. And the idea of kind of creating a new situation where objects are taken abroad from conflict zones today is something that I think international organizations like UNESCO are very concerned about, and they can see a kind of potentially another situation further down the line of worrying about the colonization of other people's cultural heritage. But anyway, it was not a very happy outcome at that time. And for a long time, the idea of a safe haven was something that was simply not spoken about. But then it was actually brought up by UN Special Rapporteur, the 2019 UN Human Rights Office established the post of a Special Rapporteur, and Karima Benoun took that position, and she once again resurrected the idea and even recommended giving asylum status to at-risk cultural heritage so that it could be removed from conflict zone to a place of safety. And in December 2016, 40 countries attended a conference in Abu Dhabi on safeguarding endangered cultural heritage, and they signed the Abu Dhabi Declaration, which specifically allowed for the creation of an international network of safe havens to temporarily safeguard cultural property endangered by armed conflicts or terrorism on their own territory. Now, to my knowledge, this has not actually ever been enacted. If anybody knows of any examples when it was used, please do put it in the chat, because I personally don't know of any. It seems to have not been taken up very enthusiastically. And indeed, I think one can easily see the reason why that would be, because we're in a situation today where there are huge numbers of refugees seeking asylum, and Western countries not very anxious to greet them or accept them. And so the idea that one might give asylum to an object whilst not accepting the people, I think is something that probably is politically not a situation that most countries would want to put themselves in. So as far as I know, this has been created but not actually acted upon. And I'm not sure that the current situation would allow for it to be so. But realistically, we know that during war, a large number of cultural objects will be stolen one way or another. So what can we do about it? How can we protect? Well, first of all, we can, I think, expect looting and theft to take place. That is one thing that we know, is very, very likely. And sorry, I should go back just because this picture is a picture of the Baghdad Museum. I'm sure most people recognized it, became very famous, with an American tank outside and a big hole through the facade. And this was really what brought the idea, I think, the concept of kind of the damage that looting can cause in wartime. This was something that was brought home to everybody in the invasion of Iraq, which is, I believe, 20 years ago this week, certainly about this time. Anyway, so it seems the right moment to reflect on this. The actual looting of the museum took place in April. And there was a massive amount of criticism of this for the fact that it was not actually predicted or stopped. And it was something that I think is a bit of a watershed mark for us, in that many of our attitudes today and many of the things that have happened, the ways that we approach cultural heritage today actually stem from this incident. Oops, sorry. You go back.
ممتلكات البلد، هرمات مصر 7000 سنة من الحضارة. هذا شعب من ايش نسوي؟
And there was a huge criticism of US military, who initially said we didn't anticipate looting, then kind of backtracked on this, although Brigadier General Vincent Brooks said, I don't think anyone anticipated the riches of Iraq would be looted by Iraqi people. Well, I think anyone who kind of knew anything about sort of museums in wartime probably would have predicted that, in fact. But it caused a great outrage. And the American army admitted that it didn't actually attempt to stop local people overwhelming the museum and ransacking it. I was just wondering if I might bring in Laurie here at this moment, if she's with us, because she, in fact, let me just stop share for a moment and let me go to Laurie, because Laurie was so involved with this particular moment, weren't you, Laurie, of the looting of the Baghdad Museum. I just wondered if you'd tell us a little bit about that precise moment when it happened and your kind of reaction to it and how events progressed.
Well, there's no question that, in my opinion, it really was a terrible embarrassment for the United States Department of Defense. And because it was so iconic, the fact that there was widespread looting citywide was not recognized, that it was part of a larger problem, but also then the failure to, the fact that it happened, and then also the problems with the comments. In terms of my approach as well, in helping the military do better on the issue, was pointing out too that the issues of morale when your force is portrayed that way in the international media, and also then the loss of respect of the U.S. armed forces in terms of how they were viewed by their coalition partners, by the militaries across the Middle East that we were hoping to work with in productive ways. It took a lot of relationship rebuilding to overcome not just the looting of the museum, but also the damage at Babylon. I really personally became much more involved after the damage of Babylon, because at that point in time, I have the forces that I work with were not military policing and that sort of thing. And so I knew that I could make a bigger difference when it came to training on issues involving base camp planning, protecting sites while minimizing your impact, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It was just a very emotional and horrendously disappointing moment for all of us who care about these issues.
Absolutely. Sarah, Melissa, is there anything in the chat or the questions you'd like to sort of bring up before we go on?
Yeah, there are, quite a few interesting questions in the chat, and I would like to remind everyone if you could put them in the Q&A section for us, just to track them better, please. So let me see here. Sorry, just because it's a bit difficult. So we just had a question come in. But actually, what I want to know is there was a really interesting statement from one of our colleagues that I'm trying to find in the chat regarding evacuating collections.
I have the question up if you need it.
Yes, could you? Thank you.
Okay, so how important is it to draw up a national evacuation plan in advance for major crises cases for the main collections? Are there any examples of countries that actually have this?
Oh yeah, I think there are. Laurie, you probably have got more insight into that, the plans. I mean, as they say, they're not always, advertised to everybody. But I mean, certainly I think many places do have such plans. Laurie, do you have any insight on that?
I would say, absolutely, that many major institutions, or what they will have too, is their priority lists for what would be evacuated versus what would be left behind. And also, when we do have some of the major museums in Europe who successfully implemented evacuation plans during prior conflicts, I suspect that you would see many of the safe havens and techniques used again if tragically they should be needed.
I've just seen a question that Catherine Neeson asked: at what point in history do we see a shift from the mentality of the spoils of war to the idea that we need to protect? I think that really starts in the 19th century, and it gets gradually reinforced over time, sort of bit by bit. But I think it is, I think it's a kind of small incremental change. I don't think there's one like big moment. It kind of comes in really with the Enlightenment and gets reinforced. Sarah, did you have anything you wanted to pick out of the?
Yeah, we actually had an interesting question come into the Q&A from Miriam. They asked, can we talk about post-Soviet countries' experience where conflicts are still palpable within communities and heritage is being used as propaganda?
Well, yeah, I'm trying not to sort of make it too specifically regional, because I'm very aware of the fact that when we're kind of discussing this, I don't want to kind of be seen, too much to be taking sides in any particular conflict. So I have kind of rather purposefully avoided being, too specific about things. As regards to post-Soviet, I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that. If you mean with regard to something like nationalism and taking over of monuments and claiming heritage in the as part of a nationalism, that's something that is very, very prevalent throughout, throughout the world, but also particularly throughout Europe at the moment. And I think it is a very dangerous thing but it's also a very risky thing that personally I'm not going to comment on too much, because I'm sure there are people here who have a great deal more knowledge of this than I do. And it's it's really a very delicate area, I would say, that my kind of lack of first-hand knowledge on it would actually not help anyone, I think. But please do put your own experiences in the chat if you would like to go along that route.
I actually do. I found what I wanted to highlight from the chat from earlier from one of our colleagues, Solomon, who worked in Syria to evacuate items from a museum, and was a volunteer. So all of these firsthand experiences in the chat are really important, I think, for our discussion, and I appreciate everyone sharing them.
Yeah, I think so. I think they're very important to give what was your own experience of this. So, okay, I'm going to go back now to share the screen. And so, bearing in mind that we know this is likely to happen, what can we do to help mitigate the impact? The number one thing we can do is to ensure that there is a complete database inventory of the collection with a backup that can be reached off-site, because this is really important. And that was one of the other things that the sacking of the museum in Baghdad actually brought up. The fact that they didn't have a complete inventory. I have to say, lots of places didn't in 2003. That was not especially unusual not to have an inventory of all of your collection. There's been huge progress since that point. And I would say the situation is much better now. But I think it's still the case that many, many museums, even quite famous ones, do not have a complete inventory of all of their collection. And certainly with the Baghdad Museum, that was the main reason why it was really hard to know how much had been stolen. You'll see that there were wildly varying estimations of the collection, of how much had been stolen, how much was brought back. Even today, you still see very, very disparate figures on this. And the reason for that is because there wasn't actually a complete inventory to work with in the first place. And what we really need is an inventory like this. That is an inventory which has, in particular, has photographs. These days, this is a bit of an old-fashioned one, really. These days, often the photographs are in 3D, but you need something that you can really identify absolutely as the object. And all of the old files, they need to be digitized. And then they need to be, when needed, they need to be sent to other databases which deal with stolen items. Because what is really essential is to establish as soon as possible what actually is missing, and to inform the international community of items that have been looted. And the sooner the better, really, because what you need to do is to stop them entering the supply chain. Because the dealers will very quickly go to conflict zones and will very quickly be able to get objects out, buy them up and get them out of the area. And you want to stop that happening. You want to stop them entering into the supply chain so they can be sold. One very important factor in this is the ECOM Red List. So this is the Museums Association, and they've begun what they call the Red List, which began in 2000 in partnership with UNESCO. They've completed 16 lists so far, which is intended to help museums, dealers and auction houses. They say that the red list has so far resulted in more than 8,000 objects being returned to Afghanistan, but it's been what essentially the red list does is to inform everybody that these are the items that are at risk. They're coming from conflict areas, they're being traded, they are by definition illegal. Whatever provenance you think you've got, if you've got an object that has been stolen from a war zone, you know, it isn't yours, essentially. And the red list has been quite successful, but there are actually a number of other databases today which can also help. Interpol does a very good art database. The Italian Carabinieri have one that's called the Leonardo database. So there are several different databases where you can actually, if you know what the object is, if you've got a proper data entry, and in particular photographic evidence, that's really absolutely essential. Then, and you can get it onto the databases, you have so much better chance of getting it back, and also of stopping it being sold on. Of course, as we know from recent revelations in the media, this is by no means foolproof, and these items still get into museums, even big museums like the New York Met. So it certainly is not a foolproof system, but nevertheless, the sooner you get it, the sooner you get the items identified, the sooner you get the information out and alert everybody to look for these items, the better chance you've got. But is there another way that you can also help to track items? Well, there is new technology available now, and that can allow you to tag items so that you can trace them if they get stolen and looted. And this is one such example.
Dr. Higgins, we're getting comments in the chat. There's no sound on the video.
Okay, well, it doesn't really matter. Okay. Thanks for that. Yeah. There was only music. There wasn't any, they didn't say anything. So you didn't lose anything.
Thank you.
So in museums with an inventory, the scale of the theft can be calculated. But with archaeological sites, when they get looted, it's impossible to know how much has been taken because it was never recorded. It was never excavated to be recorded. So, for example, if you see a site like this, these are looting trenches. So looters have gone in all of these little rectangular pits there where people have dug up and taken out objects. But of course, we have absolutely no idea how much has been taken. We've no idea whether they hit a tomb and took out lots of objects, or maybe they didn't hit anything at all and didn't take anything out. So that is really problematic because you haven't got anything to go on at all. And there's a recent publication. Well, it's not actually yet published. This is a preprint. So this is something that's been put out before it's gone through peer review, and the paper is in press at the moment by Donny Yates and Neil Brody to actually say that we've been overestimating this, that we frequently hear it said that the illicit trade in antiquity is the world's third largest illicit trade, but there's actually no evidence at all for this. We just have no evidence at all. I mean, it may well be very important, but we don't have any facts or any data on which we can base anything. In the whole paper that they go through, this, by the way, you can get on the internet. It's open source. They actually traced back. They asked UNESCO where they got this figure from, because UNESCO frequently say this too. And they asked UNESCO where they got this idea from, that antiquities trade is the third largest illicit trade in the world. And they quoted, UNESCO quoted them, some academics who had studied this. And when they asked the academics themselves, they said they had never actually said that. They had never made any statement. So it's kind of a useful paper, but it's also sort of you don't really know where it gets you, because that is the biggest problem with archaeological data. If it's not being excavated, it's not recorded anywhere, and there's no real way of knowing how much is out there. So you've no idea whether you're being successful or not in blocking the trafficking, because you don't know how much there is. So that was one type of loss, stealing and looting. But obviously, there's also a big loss through damage and destruction. And there are two ways that we can deal with this. One is through mitigation. That is from trying to stop the damage, lessen it in some way. And then the other area where we can intervene and make a difference is in early recovery. And that is what you do after the damage, when you can actually, if you can manage to get to the area that's damaged quite quickly, what can you do to, to assist the situation? Some of these I showed before in the previous lecture, so I hope you don't mind me showing them again. These are taken from a training course in SHOSI, which is Saving the Heritage of Syria and Iraq, which was run through the Smithsonian and the Penn Museum. And very grateful to Brian Daniels, who came and taught us at American University about this project and donated us a couple of slides, because they really are, it's really very impressive how you can, surprising as well, actually, what you can save. Large mosaics or wall paintings that can't be moved, they can be protected by sandbags, which are remarkably effective, actually. I mean, it's quite a kind of simple technique. It's been known for a long time. Incidentally, this fence that's in front is also part of it, in that it allows for the sort of the reverberations from a bomb to sort of to have a stopping point, if you see what I mean. The sandbags are up against that fence, which sort of stops them being blown further away. And in fact, a similar technique, in order to sort of have evidence, in order to see how good this can be, this system, Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper in Milan was saved by just such a technique. In 1943, the church suffered a direct hit from a bomb, and that's what you can see in the bottom left here. And there were sandbags up against the actual wall painting itself, and they managed to save it for us. So it's a simple technique, but it can be very effective. Here is another example of how you layer them to be effective. And it can also be used on floors as well. So another technique, for example, for floor mosaics is to cover them with protective material and then build a wall over them of breeze blocks, which makes it very difficult to loot as well, because you would have to take down all the breeze blocks. So that's quite an effective technique too. And then, of course, you would have to check for the stability of structures after any such bombing raid. And in this regard, there's really an incredibly excellent course that is done by ECROM, the First Aid to Cultural Heritage in Times of Crisis, in which they look exactly at this situation of going into stage of early recovery, immediately after a conflict, if you can get in after a conflict, or an earthquake or a natural disaster, and what you can do in that immediate period to stabilize the situation. And they run really excellent training courses on this. And in our January course, Rohit Jigaso was one of our guests, and he spoke about this and the importance of stabilizing monuments very quickly. This is a slide from the Idlib Antiquities Center, and this is also great testament to a local group, how a local group can get themselves organized to repair their own heritage. You really don't want to in any way exclude community, local people, local experts. They're the ones who really know how to do it. And at Idlib, they have organized themselves very effectively to repair their heritage. Very interestingly as well, sometimes looters take things you're not expecting them to, like big blocks of stone, which presumably were used to repair houses, but the problem is it's made the building unsafe. And then something, I'd just like to finish with something that is perhaps a sort of a really 21st century thing that we have to deal with now, which is propaganda and fake news. It's really something that's part of our modern day war, really. It's something that perhaps we haven't got historical instances to draw on to sort of learn lessons from. But it's something that's very important to non-state actors. And it was really epitomized, I suppose, by ISIS, who used the looting and destruction of archaeological sites as part of their propaganda. It wasn't only about getting the money from the antiquities, that was a part of it, but it was very much about how they could use the looting and destruction that they caused in heritage sites to serve their own propaganda. So what exactly were they doing, and how should we respond in a way? What's the best way to respond so that it's not actually furthering their cause but blocking their cause? Well, I'm sure you will remember this, which was the destruction of the Mosul Museum. And initially, when we saw scenes like this, many of the media felt that this was some sort of barbaric act. But actually, we now know that far from being that, it was actually a performance that was very well thought through, and it was very staged to produce a specific reaction. It made reference to historical reenactments of idol-breaking rituals, which would have been very familiar to the people that ISIS wanted to influence. It was extending a perception of their power, that they, you know, have the power also to take over history. And it was intended to cause international outrage. And that's something that I think needs to be thought about when we respond to these images, because too much outrage, you know, can be perceived badly. And especially if it's perceived that international organizations care more about the statues than they care about the people. Now, I certainly am not saying that that is true, and I certainly feel very strongly that, you know, we need to make that very clear, that we put people first. But it's very easy to take an outrage at the breaking of a statue and portray it in such a way as to make the person seem rather callous and uninterested in people. And we need to be careful that we don't say and do things that end up being interpreted like that. In many ways, they had a very sophisticated use of imagery. This is the Temple of Balshamin, which was blown up in Palmyra, which was blown up by ISIS. And that's not a kind of natural cloud that's put there. It's photoshopped in order to produce an image which has a lot of resonance in the world, the image of, you know, a terrible sort of nuclear explosion. I mean, it's not a nuclear explosion, but of course, a mushroom cloud is something that has a very strong imagery, particularly in Western cultures. And it was done for that reason, to cause an impact. As was the use of Palmyra for executions. It was known that this would get maximum publicity in the West. So, of course, we have to be careful not to react in that way and not to disseminate images on social media, because that's exactly, you know, what they've been put there for. We need to be careful in our approach to this. Again, actually, with the destruction of heritage sites by ISIS, there's quite a lot of confusion over exactly what they did destroy and, you know, how accurate some of the information was, because it's known that they exaggerated their impact, and then sometimes also that was picked up by Western media and they exaggerated it. So it's quite a sort of careful game that has to be played, really, in this. But it is part of the 21st century response to conflict that has to be managed during the conflict so as not to make it worse. So I think that might be, yeah, the end. So I'm just going to stop share now and come back to my colleagues and ask them and bring in also Laurie. who is, I'm not sure I actually introduced Laurie to everybody. I'm so sorry. Laurie is Cultural Heritage Officer for the US military. And she was with us last week, which was why I neglected to introduce her this week. And we've also got with us Sarah, who's an alum of ours who did her master's thesis on Kosovo. So she's particularly interested in this. And I think I'll come perhaps to Laurie and Sarah for any comments or any questions you'd like to bring up.
I would like to answer the question in the chat about biased consideration of what is heritage. And I would like the audience to know that that is something that many of us are working very, very hard on right now in the Western military environment and at NATO. We are grappling with a big shift away from the monuments officer model of World War II, because one reason it worked so well is that it was essentially a shared value system. The American officers shared the priorities of the European arts communities and museums. And so everybody had a pretty good agreement on what needed to be prioritized and saved. That concept doesn't work in the modern world because we're working cross-culturally now. And as a result, when I'm working with soldiers, I am really encouraging a much more anthropological approach, and also approach that is not so focused or only focused on objects, but one that is more widely focused on heritage, cultural identity. And as our colleagues pointed out, paying much more attention to the values expressed at the local community level. So our colleague is absolutely right. Tremendous amounts of critical heritage have been lost in the past because we didn't have the understanding that we needed of what was most important at the local level and letting those community members set the priorities. And I think one reason why Rohit's example is so compelling is because then we see when we are following the local priorities, then we see and can partner with members of the local community in terms of stabilization, restoration, and response.
I see Harry, our comms director, has said there's a lively discussion going on in the Facebook group. I don't think I can cope with the Facebook group as well as this and the chat and the Q&A. I'll have to go to that later, I think. Yeah, no, that's a really good point that you've made, Laurie, and that sorry, I can't find it now, the person who originally made it, how you actually define heritage. And of course, we've, been saying so often all along in this that we've really got it's really all about the people. It's about communities. It's not enough to just work off a World Heritage list or a national list. You've really got to know what local people want as well. And it might, it often is at variance with national priorities, for example. That's one of the kind of big fault lines that you often find when you're looking at heritage, is that, nationally there's one priority, but locally there's another priority as well. Are there any other, Sarah, did you have any questions that picked out that you think we should?
Yes, there was a question that came through earlier that our dear colleague Melissa sent me to ask you. So the question is, how important is it to draw up a national evacuation plan in advance for major crises for main collections? Are there examples of countries that have this?
Yeah, I think we that came up before. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that major museums and that will have that, but they're not going to tell everyone about it.
Right, of course, as we discussed.
that would a little bit defeat the object. But yeah, and this is something in January when we did the first course, Rohit Jigyasu, that's his speciality, is disaster and risk management. That was something that he really emphasized, that everybody must have these plans. And that's why he's so much in favor, and I support him absolutely in this, in putting the conflict plan together with a general risk management plan, which can be brought into play, not just during conflict, because I think it's really hard for people to think about that. It's something that none of us want to be in, and somehow preparing for it, it's a big hurdle to get people to do. And it's actually much more likely that people will come up with plans if you put the other kind of risk factors together and say, well, we're doing this for general disaster risk management. I'd like to thank as well Tim Perbrick's given lots of really good information here. And also I saw someone giving good information on where to go to the first aid in cultural heritage course. I honestly can't recommend that enough. Yeah, Jada has given information on that. They do a great job, and they've been doing this for some years now around the world, and it's I think the results are starting to be known. You can really see them. Yes. Yeah, Paul makes a good point. Paul Jeffrey says there's often more than one local value. That is, certainly is very that is certainly very true. It's very hard to work across the multicultural landscape and provide a kind of even protection. That is something that's, that is definitely very, very challenging to do. Yeah, and Eric reminds us that there are a number of cultural heritage professionals who are still trapped in Afghanistan. Which, Jada, thank you so much for putting all of the information from ECOM there. I think actually we're coming close to our time for wrapping up. But Laurie, would you like to make any other comments on anything?
Well, we've covered a lot of territory in the last hour, and I'm happy to answer additional questions or concerns. And I did appreciate the question about Eastern Europe. And I guess one reassuring thing I'd like to mention is that the combined forces are paying very close attention to many of those issues related to the monuments and the challenges there. So, but it's so exciting to see so many participants and so many people around the world that care about this issue. So that's very encouraging for people like me. Thanks.
Yeah. Sarah, did you have any thing you'd like to, last comments?
Yeah, I just really appreciate everyone's comments in the chat. It is very, like as Laurie said, it's just very nice to see so many people that care about these issues. And I can't wait to actually check out the Facebook group and see the lively discussion that is going on there. And just thank you again, everybody, for sharing your experiences.
Yes, thank you, everyone. And do keep communicating in the Facebook group and also the LinkedIn group. I guess the Facebook group is probably better for more sort of chatty things. LinkedIn tends to be a more professional type social media page, but it's been really great. Yes,
Barry, could I make a blatant plug for your summer course?
Oh yes, please do. Yes,
I'm going to put a link in the chat, and I will email this out in the next couple of days. Val is running a summer program in person in Rome for cultural heritage and Rome. So we will email full details, but anybody who might be interested in coming to the area, we would love to see you. Val, anything more you want to say on that one?
No, it's short. It's just 1 week course. It's going to be a mixture of a sort of a seminar type lecture in the morning, not really a lecture, more a sort of some discussion with some experts coming in like we have here. And then in the afternoon, we'll be doing a tour in Rome of something connected with the theme. I think we've sorted out the date, though I can't remember it. It's in July, I remember that. And the disembodied voice of our comms director, Harry, knows more about it than I do. So
yeah, and I will email everybody. I'll email it out in case anyone's interested.
If you want to come to Rome for a week, please do come and join us in Rome, and you'll have a great time. Any of you know Rome knows it's wonderful. So, and if you don't know Rome, now's your chance to find out about it. So, okay, I think we'd better say goodbye to let everybody go home and have their dinner. And and some of you go to bed, I guess, and some of you start your day. So thank you all very much. Next week, we'll have the last one in this session, which will be after what we can do to help protect heritage in the aftermath. So we're talking very much about also peace building, and we're going to have with us as a guest Heather Mangrum, who is another one of our wonderful alums, who has been working on the Restoring Mosul project. She started doing that with us as a student, and she now works as a consultant on it. And it's nice to hear, some good stories of some positive things happening as well. So to, help us feel perhaps a little bit more upbeat. So thank you, everyone. And thank you in particular for all the fantastic experiences that you've been sharing in the chat and on the Facebook page, which I'll have to go and look at now. And thank you, Laurie. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you as always, Harry, and also Melissa, who's had to leave us early, but she'll be back next week. Okay, bye-bye. See you all.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.